Welcome back to episode 3 of Inside SFPS. Today, my guest is Principal Jack Lain, who is the principal at El Camino Real Academy on the south side of Santa Fe. Principal Lain, how are you today?
I am good. Thank you, Cody.
Of course. Thank you for joining me. So you're the first school site employee that we're actually doing on the podcast. So I'm really excited to dive into this. One of the things that you and I actually have in common is that we kind of come from the same region of the country. We're both from New York. You're from what I call downstate, what you call upstate. Is that where you grew up? Is that kind of where you spent most of your childhood?
Yeah, I grew up in Westtown, New York, which is in Orange County, New York. If you were to look on a map, it would be where Pennsylvania, New York, and New Jersey come together. I grew up on a farm, on a dairy farm with 42 first cousins nearby, 7 or 8 uncles and aunts. So a small community that was rural and working at a dairy farm growing up.
So is that what you did through your childhood? You worked on the dairy farm?
I worked on a dairy farm. My father got into auto parts when dairy farm became more difficult in that area. And then my first career for 9 years was working at an auto parts store of my dad's, the Napa Auto Parts stores.
Was that around high school age?
Yeah, that was middle school all the way through college.
So when you were kind of coming through those years, did you always kind of have a career path that you sought out? Did you know that you wanted to get into education and be a teacher, or is that something that kind of came later?
When I thought about it, I always imagined myself in education. I must admit, one of the bigger pushes is I did not like selling auto parts, and I did not like working on a dairy farm, and thought about other things. And education is, I liked school a lot, and I liked my teachers, and I always imagined that I could be an educator from childhood.
Did you have a favorite subject when you were in school?
It always was social studies and math.
Interesting. And I know you're a musician too, so I'm surprised it's not music.
Right. And I like music very much too.
Yeah. So where did you go to college? Did you stay in New York for college, or did you leave the state?
So I'm not far from where I grew up, about 3 hours north of Orange County is Colgate University. And I went to Colgate University where I got my BA in bachelor's in history and minor in economics.
And then did you start teaching right after that?
Sort of. I got accepted into the Peace Corps, and I went to Guatemala, and there I became a 4-H agriculture extension worker. And they looked at my 11 years of 4-H when I was in Orange County, and they call it Cuatro Esse, which match with the 4-H's here in the United States. And I worked with children there. My job assignment was in the morning doing nutrition in the schools and health, and then in the afternoon working with the 4-H clubs, working in agriculture extension areas.
And when you were there, was it English speaking or was it Spanish speaking down there?
It was Spanish speaking. The first language, though, was the Mayan dialect of Cachiquel. And though I didn't learn Cachiquel because the students I worked with all had Spanish as a second language, I didn't need to know the Cachiquel unless I was going to work with the much older people and the much younger people. Though I did learn Spanish from second language speakers. So my Spanish had never gotten to be as formal as others. For example, in Guatemala, when there was rain in the village I worked in, they would say hay agua. So their language, which it just means there is water. So their use of the Spanish language was very secondary from the Mayan language that they spoke as their first language.
And is that where you picked up Spanish? Because, where we're from, I learned French in high school because I was 15 minutes from the Canadian border. When I was in 8th grade, we took a school field trip to Quebec City and spoke French there. So is that where you picked up Spanish? Because Spanish is not prevalent where we're from.
Correct. And one of my regrets of life was not starting Spanish right away in middle school and high school. I took Latin instead. The Latin is good as for the root languages. I do believe I could have learned the roots of words with a practical language like Spanish right away as well. So yeah, that was my first exposure to Spanish.
So when you were in Guatemala working with the kids, what was kind of your main duties? What did you were teaching nutrition and stuff. How did you kind of transition away from that into what was your next career after that?
So Peace Corps, you're assigned for 2 years. I was there for 2.5 years. And I ended up coming back like many Peace Corps volunteers, not knowing what was going to be your first step, though had made the decision I wanted to enroll myself into a teacher education program. I ended up with my brother. I moved to where he was in Washington, D.C. to get to sort of figure out life in my next step, working in a temp agency job with an education association in Washington, D.C. But then quickly started at Teachers College of Columbia University in New York City, where I received my master's in education for social studies. And that was a 1-year program. I tried to get a job as a social studies teacher, but in 1990, there was the total opposite of what we have now. Too many teachers and not enough jobs. So I thought to myself, well, why did I get this degree that wasn't practical? So I went straight to Washington, D.C. and signed up what's called a Peace Corps Fellows Program, where they paid for me to study at George Washington University to get a special ed degree while I was teaching in a school in actually Maryland in Prince George's County, right outside of Washington, D.C. So that was my first. It's much like the Santa Fe Community College program here, which I'm an advocate for. I think the best way to learn teaching is by when you're in a education program is to have that practical experience that you could talk about with other students also. So I was 2 years there studying for special education, which I thought would always get me a job. So I ended up getting a master's in special education then.
So your degree, so you have a bachelor's in history and social studies.
Social studies education.
And then you have a master's in
special education, master's also.
And then, so after when you got your degree in special education, you did your Peace Corps fellowship. Did that lead to your first teaching job? Finally, like your first full-time teaching job?
I actually, in Maryland was my first teaching job because like the community college program here, I was working full-time and getting paid by Maryland State as a teacher of special education while I was earning my degree. But then once I was in, and I really enjoyed my job there, but I always had thought when I was younger, we would visit New Mexico because my mother had relatives in Albuquerque. And I always thought to myself, I really like New Mexico and I need to give it a chance at some point in my life. So that was a big transition point in my life. And I thought, well, I might come back to New York State, but if I don't give New Mexico a try, it will always be a regret, I thought at that point in my life. So I applied for jobs in New Mexico after those 2 years and ended up with a job in Zuni on the Zuni Reservation for 5 years, again, teaching special education and teaching social studies at a alternative high school called Twin Buttes High School in Zuni. And actually living in those Zuni for those 5 years entrapped me and made me want to stay in New Mexico the rest of my life.
It's hard being both from New York. You know, when my wife and I were moving here, we did not realize what it was going to become.
Right.
You know, I was working in news. I worked at KOAT and I thought, all right, I'll do my 2 years, two and a half, maybe 3 years. And then, you know, I'll jump to another bigger market, you know, whether it's Phoenix or somewhere in California. But, you know, we got here and we fell in love. And so I totally understand that.
I think coming from upstate New York, people don't realize the weather is similar in some ways, especially where I'm from, probably not from where Cody's from.
Definitely
but
not.
We're sort of on that cusp of the Great Lake effect where I grew up, though it's cloudy all the time. And so I always wanted to live in a place that was cold and snow. I liked it, but I also liked the sunlight. Yeah. And that's what I was surprised about with New Mexico was that, you know, between November and February, there was somewhere in the United States where there wasn't cloud cover.
Yep. And I remember when I first told my dad that I was moving to New Mexico, he's like, oh, you're going to miss the green. You're going to miss all of this. And, you know, I was living in Binghamton, New York. I went to school at Binghamton University and I was working for a news station in Binghamton. And Binghamton is located in Broome County, and everyone called it Gloom County because, while we have 300 days of sunshine here, it's probably 300 days of clouds and overcast and gloom. And it's not even, when we have clouds here, it generally means there's a storm coming. In New York, if there's clouds, it's just overcast. Doesn't mean there's a storm, doesn't mean there's weather coming. It just is, there's cloudy.
Right.
And it really takes a toll on your mood and your emotions and stuff. So yeah, when I came here, every day you would wake up. I stopped checking the weather app. When you live in New York, you wake up every morning and you're like, all right, what's the weather going to be like today? Right. You look at the app. That's the first thing I would do in the morning. And now I think I take it for granted because I wake up. I don't even look at the weather because I know it's going to be some sort of sun, maybe some wind, and that's about it.
Right.
Was that your first time visiting New Mexico when you came out here?
No, I visited twice when I actually through a college program as on a intern. I must admit it was an internship with a minister at a church, though I must admit I was not interested in being a minister at that time, and he knew it. And I worked at his office. I just wanted to be in the Southwest for the January intern program. And also when I traveled as a kid, we would visit my relatives 2 other times.
So when you left Zuni, what was your next step?
So yeah, I worked in Zuni for 93 to 98. And then I moved to Cochiti. I knew I wanted to be closer to Santa Fe. I loved working in Zuni. Though growing up in New York, I wanted to be in a city. And what's nice about Santa Fe is it's a small city with a lot. So I decided I wanted to live in Santa Fe. And though I still really appreciated and wanted to learn more about the Native American communities, so I decided to work in with Bernalillo school districts with Cochiti for 6 years, which was another great experience I enjoyed.
And you were teaching there?
Yeah, I taught there. Then I decided I was working with special education at first, and then decided I wanted to get my K-8 license certification. So at that time, we were able to do a portfolio, and I already had 2 masters, and so I just had to do a portfolio, and I received my elementary license, and I ended up teaching for most of my time at Cochiti 1st and 2nd grades. And
then after Cochiti, you came to Santa Fe Public Schools.
Correct. And so, yeah, I was 6 years at Santa Fe. My husband and I, we ended up working. We ended up adopting a child, and Jose, and I decided I needed to be closer to Santa Fe so I could assist with all the child care responsibilities. So I ended up getting a job in Santa Fe Public Schools, starting working in E.J. Martinez.
And you were a teacher at E.J.?
Correct.
Did you meet your husband in New Mexico or?
Yes. Here in Santa Fe.
And then then you adopted your son while you were working in Cochiti, or when you came to Santa Fe?
We adopted our son while I was working at Cochiti, and then I took a year off to stay at home with him. Actually, it was more like a year and a half off because I had enough leave with Bernalillo Public Schools that I was able to leave in January of that year. And then I took another year and stayed at home with my son. I ended up helping out some friends near us with their 2 babies. So honestly, the hardest job I ever had was taking care of 3 babies at the same time for a year. I remember people seeing me walking around the neighborhood with my son on my back in a backpack with a double stroller of the twins in front of me. And so, honestly, that they say Peace Corps is the hardest job you'll love, or even teaching or being a principal. That was easily the hardest job where I had to figure out things.
I have an 18-month-old and I just have one. And sometimes I'm like, how do people do this? How do people have multiple? So I can't even imagine trying to watch after 3 kids, right. All around the same age too, probably.
They were all babies within a month apart.
Oh my God. Oh God.
So all 9 months. Yeah.
When you came to Santa Fe Public Schools, you started working as a teacher at EJ. How did you end up becoming a principal? Because, you spent a lot of your career, almost over a decade teaching. How did you start kind of moving to becoming a principal?
Well, while I was watching Jose and the two other babies, I thought, I should be doing something more. And I thought, well, let me work on getting my administrative license, which I did at UNM while I took the time off. Didn't know if I was going to use it or not. And I probably finished the coursework actually while I was at EJ, my second year there. But I continued to be a teacher in first and second grade. And played with the idea of being an administrator, but I still liked teaching very much. So I must admit it was probably about 5 years after I received my administrative license. I thought, for me, it was why I became into a principal. I think it's my antsy nature. I remember a Sweeney in the parking lot one time, and I had gone to first and second grade into bilingual education. I got my bilingual coursework done to do that, and I was working at Sweeney as a bilingual teacher there for 2 years in third and fourth grade. And I remember being at duty and thinking, I think I've worked on this and figured out that I would like another change. And I think that's the best thing about education field is you can have different experiences. And I've always been a person who wants different experiences. I've always surprised myself that I remained a principal for 8 years at El Camino Real because I've always been a person, 4 years, yep. What's the next adventure? And so anyway, I remember just being in the parking area and thinking, okay, let's try to be an administrator to have a different experience, which it has been. And I always feel people will ask me, what did you like being more, a principal or a teacher? It's hard to compare the two jobs. I like them both very much. And, they're just two very different experiences. And I remember when I was in an education program to be a principal, someone said to me, you're going to forget what it's like to be a teacher probably quicker than you think. And I thought, that's impossible. I've taught for 20 years. But it is true. I mean, after a while, I think luckily I've taught for 20 years and I know what it is to be a teacher, and I understand the stresses and the celebrations that teachers can have and how hard their work is because of my 20 years as a teacher. So I think that just makes me one of them. But I do think as an administrator over time, you become more and more distant from that. Mm-hmm. And so it's time that you need to I'm glad this year, I actually I'm in charge of a 6th grade classroom now because of staffing issues and within the 6th grade English language arts. And I work with the long-term sub there. But I must admit, it is making me want to go back into teaching, being really connected with the kids again also, and realizing how different that role is.
I've heard that from a lot of principals this year because, obviously the negative of all of this is that we have staffing issues and, principals, assistant principals, and other people who have their licenses, I should say, are stepping back into the classroom. But so many principals that I've talked to are like, I forgot how much I love teaching. And I think that's been so eye-opening is you're in being a principal and like you had said, you kind of forget what it's like to be a teacher. Then you go back into the classroom and you're like, oh, this is what I fell in love with. This is what I love. I love working with the kids. I love teaching the kids. Do you think that was one of the hardest parts about becoming a principal was leaving the classroom, or what do you think the hardest part of being a principal was?
I don't know. So I started as an assistant principal at Capitol High School, and for me, I don't think so. I mean, I think I was ready to try a different experience, and being an assistant principal it was with Chanel Wilson Segura at the time, and Mariah Runyon, who was the assistant principal at the time, and Michael Lovato. It was such a dynamic team I thought we had, and I really enjoyed the Capitol staff, that it was just a whole new adventure that I threw myself in, and I don't think I gave myself the time. And also was high school at the time, and though I had taught high school for 9 years, my years prior to Capitol High School were all elementary. And so I was just happy to be even in the high school setting again. And so I don't think I really gave myself the chance to miss teaching at that time because it was such a new job and figuring it out and how to be an administrator. I don't think I missed it at that time.
And then after Capitol, you became the principal at El Camino.
Right. I was an assistant principal at Capitol High School for 1 year. And Dr. Boyd at that time pretty much, I think people learned that, I had already said no to them asking me to be a principal at Aspen at that time, which surprising was with Christy Dillingham, who was the assistant principal over here, and she had said no. But I think you learn after a time that you can only say no so many times. And I was dragging my feet, thinking my son is too young. I don't know if I want to make the commitment yet.
Oh, so it wasn't that you weren't. Did you not feel ready to become a full principal?
No, I felt ready and I thought I could do the job. I was more concerned about the time I would lose with my son at that time.
That work-life balance.
Right, that balance. And so Kim told me, yes, Jack, we could figure this out and do this. And so I was glad to jump into it, and that first year, El Camino Real was still under construction. And I went there in November. It was talk about, other positions I had. I thought teaching in some ways in inner city DC with its urban areas was baptism by fire. I think the second baptism by fire experience I had was becoming the principal here at that time. Number one, because of the construction, because of all that was, especially also El Camino Real was being going from a elementary school to a K to pre-K to 8 school, and having to learn all that. That was a hard year, and I know my secretary Dolores still says I was amazed that you even came back a second year after that year. But I think it was an amazing staff I was working with. They helped me all through that time. And I think when you become the principal is such a different job from being assistant principal. When you're working with a principal like Chanel Wilson-Segura, who has everything organized and ready to go, you're just another person taking orders and doing what you're told. But the hardest thing for me as a principal, and I'm sure I've heard this from other principals, is you are the final decision and starting to realize, I have no one else to ask. I think one of the best advice I got, and I think it was from Felicia at Ortiz, is one time she told me, Jack, there is no, the only bad decision is no decision. You can always live with your yes or no if you second guess with you. But that's what I learned that year is, you just need to make a decision and show the staff that you're decisive.
Yeah, because El Camino is such a unique community within Santa Fe Public Schools. It serves the South Side, and it's a very bilingual school. What has that kind of meant to you, and especially because you learned Spanish in Guatemala? You're not a native Spanish speaker. How has that been? Working here in such a predominantly bilingual school.
Great. Again, it's for me, it was the staff. All of my staff members are completely bilingual, and all of them have better Spanish than I do. But what they really knew is the theory of bilingual education. And actually, I already grew to love the theory of dual language education, and because of the bilingual classes that I had taken to get my endorsement, and also in a TESOL endorsement, which were 9 credits I took throughout the years to get that. And so I knew theory. In fact, when I was at E.J. Martinez, we had a transition program at the time, and with our principal there at that time, I had made the recommendation that we move away from our bilingual education because the staff didn't feel committed, and it wasn't my feeling of that bilingual education is right or wrong. It was that I didn't feel like we were doing it what I thought was the correct way to make bilingual, which is dual language education, correct. And we didn't have the staff commitment. So I really learned that if dual language is going to work, you need to have the commitment of the staff, which is what we have. And you need to do it in a very structured way, which requires that the principal, and I did have the theory and knowledge of dual language education. It requires a special leader also who understands, who is just not bilingual. And in fact, I think being bilingual is secondary, but understands the theory of dual language education is by far the most important thing for the leadership of a dual language school.
Do you think that has been probably the biggest success of you as a principal here at El Camino, was kind of implementing that bilingual program and taking that initiative and doing it right from the start?
Yes, I think. In fact, we were transforming to become all dual language at that time. And I do think that was one of the successes I had, is moving us to become all dual language. And that was actually the decision of the school board already. And Dr. Boyd and his leadership team at that time was to move us to all dual language. The dream I always hoped for our school was to become a magnet school, which has never been the path forward for us for different reasons, because I would like to see dual language being offered to all people in Santa Fe. And I think that's something we should still look at sometime, is how could we be a magnet school and offer dual language education to not only native Spanish speakers, but more native English speakers who may want it. So that's something I always hope for our school. But, to also go back, what are other successes I had? I feel I've created a community of El Camino Real, pre-K to 8. I think anybody who is a principal of a K to 8 building, the other challenge is creating a community of so many grade levels. Yeah. And vertical alignment, and for me also the horizontal alignment of our Spanish and English with the bilingual. I mean, for example, we have a Haggerty program we use right now for phonemic awareness, and what I appreciate about it is it's a very good program, but in English and Spanish. And that's what we always needed here, was to find programs to use with our students that are in both languages, in English and Spanish, rather than use something completely different in Spanish and a different program in English. It's always hard to find those, but also it was always the vertical alignment to also find something that is pre-K to 8. Mm-hmm. And so I think we've gotten further with that vertical alignment and horizontal alignment to create a stronger community, that we're all on the same page with our education theory. And also, we have a very structured dual language program with the curriculum articulation plan that allows us to know exactly when we're teaching in Spanish, exactly when it's speaking in English. And so all of that, I think, comes together in a package. Is just not the dual language, but for any principal of a pre-K to 8th grade building, how do you create a vertical community as well? The
2021-22 school year is going to be your last school year, because after this you're retiring. What are your plans, and kind of what are your hopes for retirement?
So yes, I am retiring. My plan is that my son is going to college. He'll be going to college in California at Dominican University. Kim and I are planning on traveling in Europe, for a lot of the year. And honestly, it wasn't, we already always had this year to be a time when we were thinking of having a new adventure and doing this. It wasn't, people ask, COVID must have wore you down or things like that. No, it's just sort of what we had planned and wanting the next step, for a new adventure. But I do intend that I will have to, for different reasons, come back and be one of those who return to work. I right now feel that I'll probably return to work as a teacher, in some capacity, or, is my feeling now, but that could change. But right now I'm while I'm working with this 6th grade class, feeling like I want to be a teacher again.
What place are you most excited to go to?
Spain and Portugal, both, is where we'll spend most of our time, and very excited.
That's so fascinating. And I see, looking around your office, we have, cultural decorations and stuff. So I'm really excited for you. I'm happy that you're able to travel and kind of experience, take the year off and see what's out there, because, being kind of confined for the last 2 years and not being able to go out, I'm sure it's going to be such an amazing experience. So I'm so happy that you're able to do that with your husband. To end the episode, I'm going to ask the question that I've asked my only other guest, but it's going to be a continuing thing moving forward, is what is the best piece of advice or guidance that you've received from a teacher in your life?
Mr. Cook in high school at Menacing Valley, where I went to school, he had been in the Peace Corps. And that's when I first thought about that you don't have to have a direct career path. It made me think, talking to him, and he said to me, appreciate a gap year of some kind, whether it's once, jumping in from college. You don't have to jump into the career that you choose. Take, some years to think about what you really want. And that, to me, was the most important advice, because I think I probably could have gotten to economics and management right away. I remember it was actually Ryder firm was looking at hiring me for a position in some management after Colgate. I thought about it, but I remember thinking back to what he said and said, no, I probably should take a break and see what I really want to do. And I think it was that break that made me decide to get into education.